All right. Hey, guys, again, it's so good to be with you. If you got a Bible, would you go ahead and meet me in Mark chapter 9? This is what we're going to be looking at today. We'll actually start a little bit Mark 8, jump to Mark 9. It's going to be, we got a full agenda today, everybody. This is going to be a really good time. First service was awesome, and I'm expecting nothing less for you. Now, just a quick recap. We kind of hit last week, we did hit Jesus's magnum opus on discipleship. This is Jesus saying, hey, this is what it looks like to be a Christian. And what we had to do is we had to offload and sort of deconstruct our vision of what it actually means to be a faithful follower of Jesus in Mark chapter 8. And part of the big idea is this, that just like our culture and our cultural moment, we get Jesus wrong, so we get discipleship wrong. We tend to have these ideas of discipleship that, I sort of accept Jesus into my heart as a consultant, and he's sort of an advisor, and the scriptures are going to come around and say, no, that doesn't work. He's a king. He is the God-man. He gets all of you or none of you. There's no middle ground. And that's the offensiveness of the text last week. He said, if you're going to follow me, you got to do a few things. You got to deny yourself. You got to pick up your cross and follow me every single day. Jesus says the one who tries to save his life is the one that's going to lose it, but the one who loses his life for the gospel is the one who actually gains it in the end. And this is really the high call of discipleship, guys. This is intense. This is very different than our modern view of what it actually means to be a follower of Jesus. And it culminates in verse 38 of Mark chapter 8. Look at this. This is what Jesus says. For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation. How do you like that, Gen Z? What's up, players? Adulterous and sinful generation. What is that? No, that's not how we view ourselves. Like, we got it figured out. Look at all our technology. Look at TikTok. Look at Instagram. Look at all of our money. Look at all of our education. And Jesus is like, sinful and adulterous generation. Whoever is ashamed of me and of my words, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Now, I want to talk about this for a few minutes because what Jesus is getting at here is so profound. It's so transformational. And this is what you and I need to get as followers of Jesus. He is getting at right here the question of whose applause are you living for in life? Whose smile are you living for? Whose approval are you really living for? And Jesus says, look, if you're looking for the smile and the approval of culture, you get rejected. You can get rejected by God in the end, right? And this is what's so interesting to me, everybody, because if you look at really the last 100 years, go 100 years ago, back in the dark ages before there was nothing that we have right now, right? Imagine life without an iPhone. We just can't do that at this point. 100 years ago, people, what they cared about is, I want to be liked by like 10 people, right? It was chill. It was simple. Now life is so complicated where everybody wants to do a podcast and be liked by 10 million people, right? Totally different. It's like I used to just care about being liked by the people closest to me, spouse, kids, immediate family, immediate church network, family, friends. And now today, it's like everybody's trying to get liked by 10 million people. And here's the terror of the text. Can I tell you the terror of the text? You could be applauded by 10 million and rejected by the one whose opinion really matters. That you can't take any comfort from being applauded by the crowd, but in the same way, let's hold that intention and say this, that you could be rejected by 10 million and be under the smile of the one, and you gain out everything in the end. And this is the question, what's the motivator of your life? What are you living for? Whose applause, whose approval are you ultimately after in life? And Jesus says, if you're ashamed of me, I'm gonna be ashamed of you in front of the Father and of the angels. Now that's terrifying. I don't want you in that category. And what I'm trying to say, guys, is this. Jesus is trying to rescue you and I from being controlled by what other people think of you. That's what he's doing. He's trying to break that off of you and I. He's saying, don't live your life that way, right? I mean, I want you to think about this for just a second, because this is how so many of us live our lives. You live your life through the filter of what other people think about you. Today we call it Facebook, right? Don't tell me I'm wrong. This is exactly what we do. We live our lives through the lens of what other people think about us. This is why you work where you work, why you do what you do, the relationships that you have, the values that you have. We tend to live our lives sort of in a way on autopilot. We like to think that we're free thinking, autonomous people, but the reality is if you really get under the hood, we're all a bunch of insecure, self-centered narcissists who are deeply looking for the approval of other people. And the reason why is that's a gaping hole on the inside of humanity that was made for the celebration of God. And when you and I counterfeit that, we turn to one another and we try to be accepted, loved, approved, applauded by others. What happens is that thing never gets satiated. You get addicted to it, and it brings you further and further and further away from God. I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you with something this year. What would it look like if you stopped caring about the 10 million and you started living before the one? Come on, somebody, I'm preaching. Are you with me? All right, is this helpful? What would happen if you stopped living for the masses and you started actually living for the one? That's what Jesus is getting at. He's like, this is the secret sauce to all of life. Because let me just say this, guys, and I really mean this, as the culture gets darker and darker, moves further away from God's objective standard of moral truth, reasoning, and good, the church is going to stand in greater contrast. It's going to have two options. You and I have two options in this cultural moment as we look forward to this next year, the years to come. And I just want to say this, everybody, buckle up. It is an election year. Grab the popcorn. It's about to get crazy up in here, right? It really is. It's insane. And what's going to happen is, as we continue to venture further down the path away from God, away from the scriptures, the church has two options. We can syncretize with the culture, or we stand in starker contrast to the culture. And I'm telling you, there is a greater pressure coming to just go down the stream. And what God is looking for, he's looking for a group of people that are willing to stand up in a culture of compromise. Come on, somebody, and say, I live before the audience and the approval and the opinion of one, and his name is Jesus. And I would be rather rejected by man and approved by God than approved by man and rejected by God. And the choice is yours. This is what Jesus is doing. He's saying, this is what you got to accept, guys. Like this is the faithful walk of following Jesus. Jonathan Edwards said this, because imagine how free you would be if you offloaded living your life because of through the lens of what other people think. Imagine how free you would be if you actually did that. Jonathan Edwards, he said it this way: resolution number 1, I will live for God. Resolution number 2, even if nobody else does, I still will. Right? Come on, somebody get that tattooed on your arm. Throw it up on your Instagram. Do something with it. That's worth the price of admission. That's what Jesus is saying. And this is core, by the way, to our organizational strategy here at New Song. We've got vision, we've got mission, we've got strategy. Strategy really gets into the level of how we're going to do all of the stuff that we're saying that we're going to do. And our strategy is built around you. It's built around the member. Our strategy is to equip and empower you to do the work of the ministry. This is where, guys, what we're saying is we cannot walk in the fullness of what God has for us as a church, as a community, the church in Bellingham and the Pacific Northwest, without you saying yes to the ministry that God has for you. Did you know that God has a ministry for you? If you are sucking air, it's because God has divine purpose for your life. Did you know that? Right? And this is where we're building a community around this idea that says, look, we've gotten kind of off track the last couple decades in the church in the West. We've sort of rallied around a platform and a pastor and a preacher. And what the scriptures say is, no. Look, the job of the leadership in the church is not to do all the ministry. It's to get out of the way and equip the church to do the ministry. This is where you're critical. This is where we can't accomplish what God has called us to do. And what I want to say is this, guys. We have revival on our doorstep. It is closer than ever, and God is looking for your yes. That's all he needs. He doesn't need your incredible giftedness and eloquence. He just needs the small, humble yes of some broken, messed up people that are willing to believe that God can use us in spite of us. Amen. Is that anybody in church today? And this is our strategy, to equip and empower you. Now, what's important about this is this idea that we got to think differently, okay? And I know I'm swimming upstream of about 20 to 30, maybe 40 years of church tradition that we all have that says that we've got a different model of ministry that we've been doing. And so it feels awkward, but we got to give ourselves to this. And what we need to do is we got to look at you differently. We got to say, this is a room, if you are a follower of Jesus, of a bunch of planet shakers, kingdom bringers, and demon slayers. Can I get an amen from somebody, right? That's you. That's your job. And if you're going to be a leader in God's kingdom, if you're born again, let me tell you this, you are born again into influence. God has not designed you to take a back row seat and sort of just coast through life. You are called to lead in your marriage, in your family, in your church, and in your community, and in your business, in your workplace, in your neighborhoods. You are called into a position of influence because Jesus has all authority in the heavens and on the earth. And he's given that to us to be his people, his ruling body on the earth, to see the world kingdomized. That's your job and my job. And to do that, we got to start thinking differently about ourselves. Let me give you a leadership principle that we see in God's kingdom that we have to grab onto. And if you and I don't get this, we're not going to walk in the fullness of God's destiny for us. And the principle is this: if you live by the praises of men, you will die by their criticisms. This is what Jesus is getting at. Whose approval are you living for? If you live by the praises of men, you are going to die by their criticisms. And what you and I need to do is we need to treat the praise, the applause of people the same as the criticism of others, right? And this isn't, don't be unteachable. And that's not what I'm saying. Don't receive a rebuke. Don't receive correction. That's not what I'm saying. But what's going to happen is if you are living in your divine calling, the criticism, how many of you know is going to increase, right? Because you're swimming upstream against a lot of demonic strategy and unseen realm stuff and opinionated people. And turns out that is where Jesus calls you and I ultimately to be. And if you live by the praises of men, you will die by their criticisms. And this is what Jesus is trying to break you and I out of. You've got to learn to not let the applause of people put your head in the clouds. Because if that's the case, their criticisms are going to put you in the ground. We see a great, I think, New Testament example of this in the life of King Herod in Acts. This is really interesting. His whole family's a disaster. This guy's a real piece of work. His grandpa, when Jesus was born, he actually heard that Jesus, the Christ, the King, was born. And so what King Herod did is he ordered all of the firstborn boys in Jerusalem to be executed because he was threatened. He was a deeply insecure man. His grandson, Herod Agrippa, in Acts chapter 12, verse 21 and 23, this is what it says. He did. On an appointed day, Herod put on his royal robes, took a seat upon the throne, and delivered an oration to them. And the people were shouting, "The voice of a God and not of a man." What does that mean? Herod is incredibly gifted, that God had given him this incredible gift of speech. He was eloquent. God gave this to him for the purpose of God's glory being manifested through Herod. And here's what you have a decision to make. Are you going to use your giftedness and your resources for the glory of God, or your own glory and elevation and self-centered preservation and applause in life? That is the question. And look at Herod, how he met his end. Immediately, an angel of the Lord struck him down because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and breathed his last. How many of you know that's in the Bible? I found that this last week, guys. Check today. It's still there. It's going to be there tomorrow. What did Herod do? Right? He's got this incredible gift. It went to his head. He got the applause of people, the voice of a God and not of a man. And what Herod didn't do is he didn't say, "Hey, look, man, this isn't me. God gave me this gifting. He gave me this platform so that I can bring you in contact with his glory, his nature, his wonder." He took it all. He glory grabbed. He was a glory grabber. Come on, right? That's what he did. He grabbed the glory for himself. And God, how many of you know, will not share his glory? He won't share it. He will not share it, and he struck down Herod in that moment, which goes to show several things. We could pull that apart 100 different ways. Let me just say this, guys. Gifting isn't everything. Gifting is not everything. You could be an incredibly gifted leader, and if you are insecure, you are dangerous. And you're insecure if you live by the praises of men, because you're going to die by their criticisms. And if you're going to have highest impact in life, right? We're doing come on, this is like Jesus boot camp today, everybody. Let's go. This is good stuff. If you're going to walk in the fullness of your call, you got to be okay being rejected sometimes. And to do that, you and I got to say, as long as I am under the smile of God, that's ultimately all I care about in life. Is this helpful for anybody? Speaking to anybody? Is this confirming for anybody today? And the big idea is this, everybody. Jesus is coming back. That's what Jesus says. He says, "I am coming back. And the one who's ashamed of me, I'm going to be ashamed of them when I come in the glory of the Father with his holy angels." Now, we could get into a lot of dialogue and conversation about what exactly that means and how is Jesus going to come back. And we get really geeky, really technical, really nerdy. Is this historic premillennialism? Is this amillennialism? Is this postmillennialism? And some of you are in church, you've never heard this, and you're like, "I'm a millennial." You know, what does this even, what does this mean? What is this? I don't know what we're talking about right now. But here's the point, guys. What you and I got to recognize at the end of the day, we're on the welcoming committee and we are not on the planning committee. We're going to let Jesus be sovereign. And here's what the book says. He comes back and he wins in the end. And ultimately, and this is the terror of the text, every single one of us, you have an appointment with Jesus Christ, and you are closer to that moment now than you ever have been before. And what you and I are going to realize on that day, every person that's ever lived and sucked air on the planet, as they stand before Jesus, as you stand before Jesus, we are going to realize in that moment, his opinion was the only one that mattered all along. Right? And here's where, guys, and this is like first service was intense, and this is about to get a lot more intense. So buckle up, Buttercup. Hope you had your caffeine today, because you're gonna need it, right? But I've been just wrestling this to the ground this last week and getting so convicted, because it's so easy to trick ourselves that we're not doing these things. Let me just tell you this. All right, let me help you feel the weight of what's going on here. When you stand before the Lord, no one will be there to advocate for you. Grandma's not going to be there?
Well, I prayed for them a lot when they were little.
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, they still kind of blew their life up and rejected me and gave me the finger. Okay, cool. Grandma prayed. Awesome. She's not going to be there. Mom, dad, not going to be there. The millions of dollars that you made and spent, not going to be there. Retirement portfolio, not going to be there. All the good works that you've done, not going to be there. Measures up to nothing compared to the holiness of God. No pastor's going to be there. I'm not going to be there to say, well, Jesus, they were on the nice list, right? They weren't on the naughty list. They were on the nice list, right? That's not going to happen. No pastor, no church leader. This is you, your social media following, the 10 millions of people that applauded you in life. Nobody's going to be there. Jesus is saying, I am coming back with the glory of the Father and of the angels, and you are going to have a meeting and an appointment with him. And in that moment, and this is what terrifies me as a pastor, is we've even got people in the church where it's like we think it's going to go one way and it's not going that way, y'all, right? Because he's saying this is the mark of true discipleship, what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, right? This is a call to radical holiness in light of that day. In fact, the scriptures say, what kind of people should we be living lives of holiness in view of the coming judgment of God? Right? And this is what's so interesting. If you look at Jesus' day, everybody expected a king. Everybody expected a military political figure that was going to come and usurp the Roman Empire and deliver the Jewish nation from their oppression. We expected a lion, and we got a lamb. We got a crucified lamb. The God-man king took up a cross, suffered, bled, and died. Completely different than what we expected. And now we got a generation looking for Jesus to come back as a lamb. He's going to come back as like, oh, hey, what's up, everybody? I love you. And, it's going to be all great. And, your truth is your truth. And that's cool. And I'm okay with that. No. Let me tell you, you want to know what Revelation chapter 19 says? He comes back with a sword in his mouth and a robe stained in blood. Right? Like, that's terrifying. So we get a king. This is what he's coming back as ultimately in the end. And you and I have to make a choice. Whose praise and whose applause are you ultimately going to live for? And let me just tell you this, friend, why Jesus is trying to set you free. He says you're going to know the truth, and the truth is going to set you free. You live for the applause, the approval, the praise of men, and you are going to be a deeply insecure person whose impact is always limited by that reality. And what you and I need to do is we need to live into Jesus' vision for us as we move forward into following him together. Now, the question is, what's going to give you strength to do that, right? This is a public faith. This is a costly faith. And let me tell you this. It says in chapter 9, verse 1, look at this. Truly I say to you, says Jesus, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God after it has come in power. If you're taking notes, if you got a Bible, circle that word see, because this is the ticket. You want to know how you're going to live into everything that I just told you? You need to see something. You need to see differently. And we go into this encounter that the disciples had with Jesus in verses 2-8. Look at this with me. It says this: after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became radiant and intensely white as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good that we're here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. For he didn't know what to say, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, this is my beloved son, listen to him. And suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus only. Friend, this is what you and I need to see. We gotta see what's going on here. And they had an encounter with Jesus. There's some deep theological stuff that's going on here that unfortunately we don't have time to fully nuance out, but let me call your attention to a couple things. Notice that this was on a mountain. And if you read the Bible, anytime you see a mountain showing up, it's something really important is about to happen, okay? So that should immediately perk our interest and say, okay, Jesus is taking his disciples up on top of a mountain. We see Moses and Elijah there. Jesus is transfigured. Look at this. This blows and breaks every box that you and I have about Jesus. It says that he was transfigured before them. He literally became otherworldly. The word for transfigured in the Greek is metamorphao, and it carries this idea of a metamorphosis. Say that 10 times fast. It's this Jesus, he had an appearance before and he took on a completely different appearance in this moment. It says that he was radiant. His clothing became intensely white as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared Elijah and Moses. So we've got Jesus transfigured, right? He looks otherworldly, right? He's got like lightning bolts in his eyeballs. Everybody's freaking out. Moses and Elijah are there. And I love Peter. He's so dumb. What does he say? It says that he's like, hey, can I make some tabernacles for you guys, right? Like, let me just say this. If you have an encounter with the glory of God, just shut up, okay? Like, just don't say anything because it's not going to go well for you. Everybody's freaking out. They're like, this is Moses. This is Elijah. Peter, James, and John, they grew up hearing about these guys in church on Sundays all of the time. They're heroes to these guys, and here they are before the heroes of their faith, seeing them. Jesus is transfigured. It says that they were absolutely terrified in that moment. Now, what's going on with Moses and Elijah? This is really important, okay? So if you think back on the story of Moses has an encounter with the glory of God on a mountain, right? You remember that? What mountain was it? Somebody shout me down. Sinai, 5 points for the lady in the back. Well done. Okay, so, right, he has an encounter with the glory of God at Mount Sinai. God delivers the people of Israel from Egypt, drowns their enemies. They go to Mount Sinai, and what happens is the fire of God, there's a cloud that descends on top of the mountain. God's glory is radiating. It is terrifying. Everybody's freaking out. All of the Israelites need a change of pants. It says that on that day, 3,000 touched the mountain that God said, don't touch it. I am holy. They touched the mountain. They were struck down right there, right? Right? Like, and here's what we get wrong about Jesus, guys. And let me just say this, because many of us need to hear this. He is holy. Like some of y'all, and this is definitely our culture, we have brought Jesus down to a level of relatability and of comfort and of Jesusism. He's my homeboy, right? We got the t-shirt, the hat, like we're just chill and it's cool. And he's kind of like my buddy and he lets me do whatever I want. And it's like, yes, you do get a comforter in Jesus. Yes, he is the friend that sticks closer than a brother, but I would remind you that he is holy, which means he is other than. And you and I we got to have a reverence here, guys. This is what we're going to talk about really for the rest of the time. And God, he's resting on the mountain in a fire and in a cloud. And Moses, he draws the short stick, so he's got to go up and talk to God while everybody's freaking out down below. He goes up on the mountain, he visits with God, and he comes down, and it says that Moses veiled his face because he was shining. His face was shining. How many of you know that when you see Jesus, your countenance changes? Right? When you encounter God, your countenance changes. And Moses, he did that. He goes up the mountain, he sees God, he comes down, veils his face because it was shining. Now, here's what we see. Mountain, cloud, voice of God, glory of God on top of a mountain in Mark chapter 9. Do you see the overlap here? The Jews were waiting for a prophet like Moses to show up, and here we are in this moment, and here's the key difference. Moses and Elijah reflected the glory of God. What we see here with Jesus Christ, he is the source of the glory of God. Do you see that? Moses, he reflected. He got up, he saw, wow, this is crazy, came down, he reflected it. Jesus, he is the one that's transfigured. He is, what's happening here is the glory that had been concealed in his flesh as the God-man is being displayed to his disciples here. And it says that they were absolutely terrified. Now, let me just say this, guys, because this is what our culture has done. Our culture has done what Peter, James, and John did. You want to talk about the tabernacles thing? Why did Peter say that? Hey, Lord, this is great that Elijah and Moses are here. Let me make 3 tabernacles. Reflect back on the wilderness wanderings of the Jewish nation in the Old Testament scriptures. What they would do is they had a tabernacle that was at the center of the camp of all of the tribes. And that was the place where the glory of God was said to dwell, right? They literally saw the glory of God fill this thing. It was awesome. It was epic. It was amazing. And what Peter is doing right here, this is classic foot and mouth syndrome, is he's freaking out and he's like, I'm going to make 3 tabernacles. You want to know what he's doing essentially? He's bringing the glory of Jesus down to the level of Moses and Elijah. You see that? And the whole point of the encounter, what does it say? What does God say? This is my beloved son. Listen to him. And suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus only. You want to I'm telling you what culture does here. And I don't want anybody in our church to do this. And we tend to do this in the West all of the time. We sort of bring Jesus down. We say he's on the same level of like a philosophy or Buddha or Confucianism or New Age practicing or meditation practices. We bring the glory of Jesus down and we say he's sort of on that same field as everybody else. And here is God elevating Jesus even over the law and the prophets symbolized by Moses and Elijah. And he is saying the word of Jesus supersedes everything in life, right? Do you see that? Then if you want to walk in freedom, friend, this is how you got to do it. Notice what happened at the very end of the encounter. And suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus only. And this is the challenge for this year, right? What would it look like if you shut off all of the other voices and we just did that thing? If you just did that thing. We live in this digital age, guys, where, sociologists say that we see something like 3,000 to 5,000 advertisements a day. We live on digital overload. There is no silence and solitude in your life, period, across the board, right? The one last safe space that we had was the shower, and now you got that, some of you looked up at me right there. Wow, okay. I don't know what that was about, but welcome back from your nap. Showers, yeah, okay. Don't know what to do with that, but glad you're here. Okay, so, right, like that was the last safe space. And then you installed the speakers throughout the house, and now you podcast there, and you don't have any time to just shut out all the voices. And this is God saying there is only one voice necessary, and it is the voice of Jesus Christ. They looked around. Come on, you can get excited about that. That's okay. They looked around, and they only saw Jesus there. And let me just say this, friend, only Christianity says Jesus stands above every other philosophy, every worldview, every religion, every way of life. He is the literal source of glory. He supersedes Moses. He supersedes Elijah. The glory of God is testifying to the person and the work of Jesus. Now let's talk about glory here for a second, because this is a mega theme in the scriptures. And glory is referring to the sum total of God's divine attributes, wonder, radiance, the fullness of his excellence and his character, the visible splendor of God's manifold perfections. That's glory. And we tend to view this as sort of like a cute, kitschy thing where it's like, oh yeah, cool, glory. But let me just show you why you and I need to think differently about this. If you go back to Exodus chapter 33, verses 18 through 20, Moses, he says, God, please show me your glory. He's like, I want to see the revelation of your character and your nature, the fullness of the weight of your nature, and press it upon me. And this is what God says back to Moses. But he said, you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live. Right? Think about that, right? Like, God, show me your glory. This sounds awesome. I just want to see it. And God's like, yeah, you die. Right? Like if you saw me, if I just showed you all of my glory, if I showed you who I was, Moses, all of your wires, they would short circuit and you would literally explode into a billion different pieces. And this is where we get God wrong, guys. There's this entire category in the scriptures called the fear of the Lord. When you and I see God, this isn't a fear of punishment if you are a believer in Jesus, because Jesus took your punishment, but this is a reverence and this is an awe. And we come in contact with this idea that says, I'm not even supposed to be in the same room as you, right? Like this fascinating, brilliant, beautiful God of all creation. Think about it. How beautiful does the God who created the category called beauty have to be? And here's what I'm trying to get at, somebody, because this is the problem in the Western church. We so often get bored with a God that we barely know. We're bored with him, but we barely know him. And it's just like we get familiar. And it's just like, yeah, okay, cool, glory and Jesus and whatever and transfiguration. I'm telling you, every time somebody encounters the glory of God in the scriptures, they fall on their face and they are absolutely terrified. And it's a miracle that they make it out on the other end. I'll give you an illustration. I am very hesitant to do this because we're talking about weighty realities here. But let me illustrate for you what this is like. Growing up every 4th of July, which is like the greatest holiday ever. Can I get a shout from somebody? Okay. And growing up, my stepdad, this is awesome. He grew up out at Sandy Point, and him and his friends all throughout their childhood and into their adult childhood, what they did was they spent like $5,000 to $10,000 a year on fireworks. All right. Come on, somebody. You know where this is going, okay? So this is awesome. So growing up, we'd go out to Sandy Point, and there's this beach that's super long, and everybody, like, this is a secret gem. I shouldn't even be giving you this information. This is insider secret stuff here in Whatcom County, guys. It's insane. The whole beach just lights up, goes on for hours, and we would always do this show that kind of became the finale because nobody did it as good as we did. And what would happen, I'm like this 15-year-old kid, and we got like 20 artillery shell tubes that are just lined up on the beach, and we would just have rows of artillery shells behind us. And what we would do when it came time to do our thing, we would drop the shell in there, light it off, and it was like just war zone for like 15 minutes. It was the most insane thing. You've got these explosions happening everywhere, the radiance of the fireworks in the skies. Every once in a while, you could feel the percussions of everything blowing up around you. Like, literally, it's incredible that nobody ever ended up in the emergency room. I don't know how that happened. But every once in a while, what would happen is because we use these tubes for way too long, you're only supposed to launch like 3 or 4 shells through it. Every once in a while, what would happen because we didn't do that, they'd blow up on you. And so I remember having this memory where I'm just like, yeah, this is great. And like 16 years old, light it off. All of a sudden, all I see is light. I'm like, God, and the thing blew up on me, right? And it knocked me back, and I'm like, where am I? What just happened? I thought I blew my hands off. I didn't know where I was. It was this crazy, guys, that is kind of like glory. Like, it's like, but it's like 10 billion times more than that. When you and I get around the glory of God, we don't make it out alive. If you're not in Christ, that's what God is saying. You cannot see me and live. And this is where we've messed around in our culture, and we've been like, yeah, okay, cool, God, whatever, Jesus, my hope. You can't do that. You literally cannot do that. Let me share some scripture with you. Okay, because here's why this is important, because many of us in the West, what we do is we've sort of made Christianity and religion this feminine thing, and thank God for you ladies that have been holding it down for the last several decades. Y'all are heroes. You're dragging your families to church, and you're amazing. And what we got to do, and part of the reason why it doesn't work for dudes, let me tell you why. I don't want to worship a guy as God that I can feel like I can beat up, right? You know what I mean? And that's the caricature of Jesus that we really have. And Christianity is viewed as this feminine thing. And like, I got to go to church and I got to sing, and I don't really do that. And people kind of cry, and there's emotions. And some of you dudes are like, what's an emotions? You know, I don't even know what that thing is. I'll tell you what an emotions is. An emotions is something like a disease. And depending on which one you get, it's like on a spectrum between a cold and a cancer. Okay, so that's what an emotions is. Welcome to church. But we don't do it. We're just like, I don't want to do that. Get that weird stuff away from me. Can I tell you, that is a gross misunderstanding of the glory of God. All right, let me show you some stuff. This is what we got to recapture. Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah has an encounter with the glory of God. This is crazy. It says, in the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up. The train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face. With 2 he covered his feet. With 2 he flew. One called to another and said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, this is Isaiah's response. Woe is me. He is freaking out, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. So I'll give you another one in John chapter 1. John is Jesus' best friend. was Jesus' best friend. He's the guy that leaned up on Jesus' chest at the institution of the communion supper, and asked who was going to betray Jesus. And Jesus told him they were close. Jesus entrusted his mother Mary to John at his crucifixion. These two were tight. This is what it says in the book of Revelation about John seeing Jesus, his best friend, his encounter with the resurrected glory of Jesus. It says, then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire, like lightning bolts, like a burning flame. His feet were like burnished bronze refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword. His face was like the sun, shining in full strength. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. Right? This is his best friend, John, right? And there's no like, hey, Jesus, we go way back. No. He's encountering the glory of God and falling at Jesus's feet as though he was dead. All strength left him. It took every ounce of strength to try to lift his face off the pavement. He didn't have any. He can't move. He is totally done, out of commission, paralyzed. But he laid his right hand on me, saying, fear not, I am the first and I am the last. Right? And here's the thing, guys. Let me just say this. This is where, honestly, my throat just falls into my stomach every single time that we gather, because we take communion every single week. And I know this for a fact that some of us, we just do this flippantly and we don't realize that we are coming in contact with the glory of God. Like I'm telling you, it's incredible that we all make it out of this building alive today, right? Like it's just incredible that we do that, right? Because the church is where the presence of God now dwells on the earth. And he is holy. Acts chapter 5, you know the story, many of you, with Ananias and Sapphira. This is church age. This is the age of grace. They sell their property. They come to the church and they're like, hey, yeah, here's all the money from the property. But what they did is they lied about it. They were like, yeah, we sold it for 40 grand and it was actually 80 grand. And they kept a bunch of money for themselves. Come to find out, Peter has an encounter with the Spirit, realizes what's going on. And what happens, because Ananias lied to the Spirit of God in the church, he got struck down. He died, killed by God right there, just done. Crazy, right? Well, what about grace? Yeah. Yes, grace. We'll get to grace in a second. But guys, we got to hold in tension this idea that God is holy and he will not share his glory with anybody else. Come on, somebody. We got to get back to the fear of the Lord as the church of Jesus. I'm telling you, he is holy today. And here's part of the reason why we don't possess this. We don't possess a reverence, why we are not fascinated by God. Let me tell you this. This is why. Because many of you in this room and us in the church of Jesus, the reason why we're not fascinated with Jesus is because we're too fascinated with ourselves. It's because we're too impressed by ourselves. You want to know why you're not impressed by God? It's because you're too impressed with yourself. I don't see Peter here in Mark chapter 9. You know, he's not like, oh, hey, Jesus, you're transfigured. Look at your clothes. They're intensely white. He doesn't get up and like, hey, what's up, Moses? What's up, Elijah? You want an autograph? You know, like he doesn't do that. He's not like, yeah, look at me and how awesome I am, everybody. I'm Peter. I'm the Lord's rock. No, what does he do? Says something stupid because he's freaking out because of the glory of God, right? And here's what we need to do, y'all. And this is what God wants to do in your life this year. We got to break the fascination with self so that we can become fascinated by the beauty of Jesus. And some of us, the reason why we're not impressed with him is because we're too impressed with ourselves. We spend time contemplating our own glory instead of Jesus's glory. Your mind is consistently going to you and how important and significant you are. In fact, there was a study that came out recently in recent years where basically a bunch of people were pooled, and the question was, hey, how important do you think that you are on a scale from like 1 to incredibly significant? And a record number of people were like, I am incredibly significant. My life is incredibly significant. This wasn't like a sentimental, like, yes, your life matters. Of course it matters. But they're answering from the lens of like, my life matters in regard to global terrorism and trade deals. All right. That's the culture that we have right now. It's self-centered. It's inward focused. And this is going to keep you from being fascinated by the beauty of Jesus. But can I tell you something shocking? Here's the thing that's shocking. It also works in the other way. That if you are consistently focusing on how miserable and pathetic of a person you are, you're doing the same thing. Your mind is going towards you, not towards the wonder and the beauty of God. Your mind is consistently going towards, I suck, I can't do it. You grew up in church, you grew up in a legalistic environment. I know I talk about this every week, and it's because some of you grew up in this, and I got to keep punching this thing in the face every single week so we can get you some freedom and some breakthrough. You grew up under a legalistic system. You talk horribly about yourself. I'm an idiot. Why can't I just get this? I screwed up again. I'm never going to figure this out. Why can't I just get it? You look at other believers and you're like, why can't I just be like them? Well, let me tell you why. Let me tell you the secret. You break your fascination with yourself and you turn it into obsession with the glory of God. This is what you and I need to do this year, guys. This is the invitation of the text. Would we be a people fascinated by the beauty of God? Amen? Can I get a shout from somebody if you're with me? All right. Hey, worship team, communion team, let's get up here. And we're going to take communion in just a second. John Piper, he talks about the cross, and he says that the cross really is the blazing center of God's glory. I love that idea. That the cross of Jesus is the fullness of the display of the character and the nature of God. And we see that traced all throughout the Gospel of John, where John is continually pointing us to what he refers to as the hour of glory. You want to know what the glory of God is? It's God taking on human flesh, dying for you because of you instead of you on the cross, satisfying the wrath of God so that you and I could come into relationship with him. So now, right, it's like, here's the illustration that comes to my mind. It's like the sun. Like if you look at the sun, it's gonna burn out your retina. How many of you know? If you look at the sun with the naked eye, it's just gonna burn out your retina. What do we need? We need a lens to encounter the radiance and the glory of the sun. Left to our own, the glory consumes us. But now what Jesus has done, he is the lens by which we can see and encounter the glory of God and be forever changed. For now, the scripture says in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, that we all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of God, are being transformed into his image 1 degree at a time. And I want to believe for you for that kind of a moment at the communion table here. And would you stand with me? I'm going to pray for us to that end. God, I do pray that you would come and hijack this moment. We want to see you like never before. And Lord, I don't know what each person in here needs to, how we're going to respond individually to this moment. I know that you're doing stuff in the hearts of your people. And Lord, as we come to the foot of the cross, as we behold the blazing center of your glory, I pray that we would never be the same. Would you come and move in this space as we reflect, we remember, and we celebrate what you've done. In Jesus' mighty name, amen.